So today we're talking about The Hill. It is a 2023 film. It was directed by Jeff Celentano with a screenplay from Angelo Pizzo and Scott Marshall Smith. Um, I did not know anything about I watched the film blind, and it was only afterwards that I found out it was written by Angelo Pizzo, who also wrote Hoosiers and Rudy, which completely makes sense, right? It's also interesting. I mean, they're two of the most they're pretty widely considered as these great inspirational American sports films, right?
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
haven't watched those films for a very long time. I probably watched them in my teens. Um, yeah, like 20 plus years ago. And in preparation for this, I did watch a few clips. Um, just a lot of just even from the clips, a lot of similarities, I think, like just in the music, just in that like inspirational tone and vibe. So I thought this film was interesting. Yeah, I mean I guess let's jump right into it. Uh, it starts off with a very what I thought was a very classic Hollywood opening. It starts with a flashback. We see frustrated Ricky Hill driving off in his car. And then he arrives at his old home, and then the story kind of gets started. Any initial thoughts about that opening and just initial impressions, about the film?
Yeah, no, I think this will be an interesting conversation because
Yeah.
I don't have like super strong opinions about this one. Like I don't have I think every film we've done previously, there's stuff that I love and stuff that I hate or something like this one. I think what's interesting about it is like the lack of, you know, strong emotions that it elicited in me, if that makes sense.
Mm,
So that's not like I guess a ringing endorsement. I mean, when you mention films like Rudy and Hoosiers, and I mean, I associate those are classic sport films. I associate those with like one or numerous moments in that film that make like that give you a chill or like make your hair stand
mm,
up and like you know that those like overwhelming swells of like what sports can do. Um, Honestly, to me, this felt more like somebody who's seen a lot of those movies and wanted to make one than somebody who has made like I almost wonder. You never know with like arbitration credits. Like, is this really his that he wrote it, or did other people write movie and then they called in like the guy who is known for writing these sports to like kind of like do a pass that then changed it significantly? We'll never know. We're not in on that arbitration, but like I'm really interested to hear what you think because I just never quite got there with this film. Like I always
mm,
felt like it was almost there, or there were moments, and that could also say more about me than the film, right? It could be that when you're a kid, sports stories have more ability to affect you, or something like that. Maybe it's easier,
mm.
Um, I was more of a sports fan in general when I was a kid. I love, I should say I love sports films in general. And
Do
then this
you?
film, what's interesting, it had the yeah, I mean this
Yeah.
also has the added bonus of it's based on a true story too, right? So it has everything going for it in terms of like a great story to make a film.
Yeah, I would
The
agree.
question,
It has all of those
yeah.
elements, right? But well, what is your can I ask you, what is your favorite sports film?
Ooh, that's so hard.
Do you like a lot of them?
Uh
It seems like you like quite a few of
I
them,
like a
right?
lot of sports films. Yeah,
Really?
I mean, I could easily name five. Even if we're talking just baseball, I think you could easily name 5 to 10 baseball
I
films
guess
that are
so. Yeah, you're right.
significantly better than this one, right? I mean, baseball is such a huge thematic thing in film and like film history. So I mean, there's so many of them. Even if you, and it also depends what you count as a sports film, right? I think probably my top three, four, top five for sure
Oh wow.
films of all time.
Okay. Raging
Raging
Bull.
Bull would
Sure.
be in
Okay.
there,
Raging Bull.
and
Yeah.
Raging. If
Yeah.
you count that as a boxing film, like then yeah, that would be like my highest rated. like sports film probably.
Mm,
But it's also that's like less so of a sports film than a drama and so many other things. But I mean, yeah, I think we probably shouldn't do this, but if we wanted to, I'm sure we could both come up with at least 10 to 20 sports films that are like considered classics and are
mm,
amazingly well done.
yeah. Yeah, just
What
even
about
like
you? Do you have a favorite or
um favorite sports film. Yeah. I mean, just recently, just watching that's the series, The Last Dance. It's obviously it's a documentary series. It's different, but yeah, that just kind of comes to mind. Um, yeah, I don't know if I'm, yeah, Raging Bull is obviously a great film. Um, I should revisit that at some point, but great drama, super intense. Um, Yeah, just it's such vivid. I just so many vivid images from that film that it just still kind of pop into my head that, the violence of it, a really interesting film. But yeah, I don't know, Mighty Ducks, I don't know.
yeah, well
I'm
that's
not a huge sports movie fan though. Now that I really
but
kind
I
of
feel like
think of
Mighty
it.
Ducks is actually a great parallel, right? Because you're talking about a PG movie, which this
Mm,
is a PG movie. I think Mighty Ducks is probably PG, right? But if
yeah.
not, it's like it's a Disney, it's a family oriented you know, film that involves younger kids, which
Mm,
again, even that, like that's such a there's so many of these movies that like even if you think of filter it down to that subset, like a family-oriented sports film that's geared towards kid audiences, there's
mm,
still probably 20 or 30 films that I would think of before I would think of this one.
mm.
Um, like I think this one we're talking about it because it's 2023. I think you literally selected it because you were like, well, it's number 10 on Netflix. We know
It's
nothing
number
about it. Let's
one. It
see
was
it.
number one on
It's
Netflix.
number one on Netflix. So
Yeah.
that's reason enough to watch it, right? But like this what partially makes this different is it also has the like Christian element,
Mm,
um, which is not really a part of a lot of those other films, right? The other films are more like characters and sports are the basis. This is kind of like almost 70% sport and 30% like Christian, it felt to me.
mm, mm,
Like it's almost, and that's why I wonder, like maybe it's a good film, but it's just not for me because it felt a little bit to me like Christian rock almost.
mm,
Like I don't listen to Christian rock music too much, but like a lot of people love Christian rock music. And so maybe this is like the filmic equivalent of that. Um, or even like I, I just had this like really strong the strongest reaction I had in this entire movie was probably when the credits rolled and they started playing this like Rub a Little Dirt on It song. And it was just like the most country thing you could imagine. And that's like just so not my type of music or anything I would listen to.
mm,
And it kind of almost like retroactively made me like think about the entire film. So I was like, oh, maybe this is just I'm not the audience for this, like which is possible.
mm. Yeah, I
Um,
guess let's kind of break down some of the things I suppose that worked for you and some of the things that obviously didn't work. Yeah, that's interesting. Being such a sports fan, a sports movie fan. Were there any parts that were like you really felt, oh, this was really compelling or this was really interesting or powerful? Were there any moments like that that you can kind of pick out, Dom, in the film?
there were moments that I could tell could have been, but I didn't feel it, right?
Mm,
Like for example, let's just pick one. Uh, in the tryout, he hits supposedly like 19 homers in a row or something
yeah.
like that. That's like one of those moments that like if you have a moment like that, and if it's based on a true story, even if it's embellished a little bit, that's like, okay, this is a tent pole moment in our movie, right? Like that we got that, and instead it's kind of like a throwaway. It's a moment for me that doesn't embrace cinematic storytelling because like it was played really realistically and in the point of view of the character of was it Red or whatever the
Mhm,
scout's name is, he doesn't know what's happening because they're actually so what's happening is he's hitting home runs and it's landing on an adjacent field because it's like
mm,
the field share a fence and it's landing on the other field, which is where this person is. And for it's pretty much the same beat over and over again. They're like, what's happening, who's throwing that, like stop throwing, what's going on? And it's like for me, even if that probably is more true to how it really happened, because they wouldn't even believe this was happening, because it is so unbelievable. It's like, okay, do that once, maybe twice, and then take that moment for the music to swell and for somebody and to see the reactions on the characters' faces as they feel like the realization of like the awesomeness of what this person is doing.
Mm,
Right. And like that's kind of like a cheesier way to go, but also like that's kind of for me where sports films live is like right on that edge of like cheese because or like pushing the heightened because that's kind of the point, right? Like we're all buying into the fact that this is a powerful moment, even though ultimately it's quote unquote just sport, right? Like in Hoosiers, at the that final game, like it means a lot to us because it means a lot to the characters in the story. Obviously, this moment means a lot to Ricky Hill, but instead we're seeing it through the POV of like the confused people who don't know. Like I don't think we see him much at all when he's swinging that and hitting those home runs. We don't even really like we know obviously he probably feels good about this, but do we know this is probably one of the best moments in his life? Do we know like people are shocked and amazed at what's happening?
mm.
And so like we like
There's a disconnect there.
that there's a disconnect there. I think the only powerful moment to me where I really felt an emotional like something in my throat was actually one of the very small characters in the movie, his mother. There's like one scene that his mother gets, and the actress like kills it, where she's basically like had enough with the father, with Randy Quaid, and she's
Mm,
like I was there, when we gave birth to him, and they said like he'd never walk, and they said he'd never have, all that stuff, and like the truth there is palpable to me and I felt
mm,
like wow that's like I could put myself in that moment of like having a kid and the doctors are telling you this stuff and then but like when we see the payoff in that in the movie which we do which is where he breaks off his brace and he starts walking like it's kind of like they play it for surprise like they're playing a trick on the father like to like reveal this to him, right? And to me, that felt like, well, that's probably how they did it in real life. So that's why it's in the screenplay. Like they wanted to
mm.
surprise him. But it kind of robs us of like the big moment and the reaction of like, holy shit, like your son who's been in braces his entire life is now walking around without braces and like the miracle of that. So I don't know if it was like how you would describe it, like almost like afraid to push it to the music swell moments, or or maybe they did, and I just as an audience member wasn't feeling it for whatever reason too, which is possible, right? We have to own up that sometimes you're just not in the right mindset when you watch a movie, which is why I'm interested to hear like if you did feel it in those moments, and maybe it's just me.
No,
Um,
I agree with that moment too, the brace moment. I really wanted to see. I did feel a bit robbed there. I did want to see the process of well, what happened there, and it is Ricky Hill's movie, right? So I did want to see. I did want to see how he would respond to that. And it's the same thing with the homers too, the tryouts. Yeah, um, that must have felt so amazing to show what he was capable of, and we were kind of there was something missing there. Yeah, I would agree. Just it had all of the elements to make some interesting, inspiring, compelling scenes, but I just felt it was a little bit short. It felt short. Um, I don't think
it's not a
I
short film; it's over 2 hours long.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right.
It's got a lot. It's more that like to me, I feel like if I had listened to the real Ricky Hill tell his story in a bar for 2 hours,
Mm,
I would have gotten the same as watching this movie.
mm,
And I mean that like in sort of a negative way, right? Because it doesn't take like the language of film and like what cinema can do to elevate the story to something where I feel something. To me, it more felt like I'm getting the facts of what happened in this guy's story, and that story in and of itself is like amazing. But it didn't not that it wasted the story, but I didn't feel like, wow, it felt like to me like somebody telling me a story in a very like outliney way. And it's
mm,
like, hey, there are these giant moments, these like tent poles of like this story that you're going to hit that are huge and important to know for the arc and for all of that. But that's just different than me like empathizing with the character and feeling these things.
Mm,
Like I'm not really swept up in the emotion. And then again, that's what sports films do so well. Is like they sweep you up. And that's what sports in real life do, right? Fandom is that. It's like this ridiculous notion that this is happening to you, even though you're just, it's in the word, right? A fanatic. Like
mm,
it's about like aligning yourself with someone so closely that what's happening to them is like it's happening to you. And I felt very distanced from Ricky Hill for pretty much this entire movie.
mm,
Um, so and I don't have any like I don't it's a hard thing to do. I don't have the answers. I don't know like
mm,
what should have been done differently. But and it is like you said, it was number one on Netflix. So I would have to
yeah.
believe that means that people are connecting to the character and to the story. Um,
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting that critics gave it like a 40%, and then the audience gave it a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes.
yeah, I mean Rotten
Um,
Tomatoes is what
yeah.
it is, but it's it what's interesting to me is this is where like the algorithm of it all comes into play, right? And this is where the
Mm,
Netflix comes like it might be that if you check the boxes Christian, baseball or sport or whatever, and based on a true story, the algorithm says you're going to be near the
it's gonna be a
top
hit.
of new movies because those are things that people those are it's a common denominator for a huge number of people and there's something to be
Yeah.
said for that, right? Like if you make a super niche movie, you know, okay, there's a very small audience for this, but I have to hit them those, I have to hit 100% of that small audience hard, and
Mm,
then it's going to be well received. If you make something that has very broad appeal and it's a B level movie, then that's not a B movie, but like a, as opposed to A, B, C, D, like, um, that's another way to go.
mm,
Um, And also, like, it's 2023. So if we did go and list all of the great baseball movies that we've all seen, probably most of those movies are 20 plus years old,
yeah.
right? And so you're also dealing with an audience of people who may not even be aware of movies like that, right? Like,
Mm,
but
yeah.
yeah, I mean, the natural, the rookie, even major league, um, league of their own. I mean, how many baseball movies are there that are just, and I'm sure there's people shouting right now who are watching, like, there's this movie and this movie. There's so many baseball movies that are amazing.
Mm,
Field of Dreams, people love. Um, so
yeah.
it's like, do you think 10 years from now, people are going to be telling people, hey, you got to watch The Hill?
No, yeah. There are a lot of shortcomings to this film. I mean, how did you feel about how did you feel about that opening scene, that flashback? Um, does it,
Honestly,
yeah. Do you
no, go
remember
ahead.
it? I mean, I thought the dialogue was a bit clunky there. I thought the dialogue was pretty clunky overall, unfortunately. Doesn't quite, it's
It's
just
tough.
awkward.
It's
It's
tough
just,
with
yeah.
it's tough with kid actors too, right?
Yeah, that's
Like
true as well.
sometimes it's hard to know. Like I wouldn't even blame that so much, but I do think like think the device of opening film for me did not work, right? So
Why do you
just
think,
so
why
people
don't you
like
think it worked
so
exactly?
so so what we see is the older Ricky Hill storming out of what we don't know is the tryout, but it's a tryout, and then he drives to his childhood, um, home where this cemetery, the church or whatever,
Mhm.
um, and I think that was put in there so that the whole, once that flashback starts, we then move forward from there up until that point. And I think it's meant to make the audience think, okay, he fails, and like this is a story of a guy who fails. And it's kind of a bait and switch because when we get there, he's storming out, but he goes back and like gets a second chance
Mm,
essentially, and that's the reality. So to me, it felt like sort of like, oh, we're gonna make them think this, but it's not gonna be the end of the story. It's gonna be kind of like the middle. Um, but like I'd say for the very beginning of the movie, I thought, okay, that's gonna be the case. But then it just the way the rest of the film is being told, okay, he didn't actually. If this whole film is about a kid who's in braces, whose life goal is to make the majors, it's not actually going to be a story about a guy who doesn't make the majors. So I was then by that, for most of the movie, then you're thinking, okay, like, what is that moment where he storms out because we know that he's going to get a shot. So for me, maybe a lot of the people it does work for them and they think and they are genuinely curious the whole time. But I don't know if you like what you thought about that when you were watching.
Um, yeah, a bit indifferent, I suppose. It just, yeah, I just thought it was an interesting opening to show him, what was, well, you kind of assumed it to be a low point in whatever he's going through.
Mhm.
So I just thought it was a pretty like a standard opening that I'm sure I've seen in other. I'm sure I've seen like the exact same sort of circumstance of an opening in other films. So I don't know, a bit
That's what I mean. Like
yeah.
like for like let's pick another one. Okay, so when they're hitting rocks and he hits this rock and it smashes this guy's windshield. And then
Mm,
like we meet the guy and it's like this instead of being angry, it's like this old like kind old mechanic guy and he's
yeah.
just like, I'll cover I got more windshields than I could do anything with and like just, remember me essentially when you're famous, when you hit the big leagues, essentially when you do something with yourself. Um, it felt to me like somebody who's seen The Sandlot, and then like they've seen the James Earl Jones like it, it didn't feel to me like, or it felt like something that would be in a first draft. That would be like a play like that character doesn't. I mean, he writes a check at the end, but he kind of comes and goes. He's not there throughout. It felt very similar to like the when he's not allowed to try out for the baseball team, and the baseball coach shows up at their house again, it didn't feel real to me. It felt like the beats of like somebody telling that story in a bar
Mm, mm,
who's going to be like, yeah, one time I was busting windshields and like another time like, I could do it 100 times right in the same place and everyone was amazed and then like bragging about that and then being like, yeah, my dad wouldn't even let me play, but I was so good that the baseball coach came down and told me that this is my God-given talent and like that whole repeated motif of like God-given talent and miracles and following God's path like it's not the subtext of the movie, it's the text of the movie, right? It's I feel like in a masterpiece sports film that's all there but it's underneath. Whereas here it's like this is a story about like God's vision for you.
mm,
I'm not going to say this is like a Hallmark movie because I don't think it is, quote unquote Hallmark movie. I think it's you know more elevated than that in a lot of ways, but it had some scenes and some elements that felt to me like and I don't, by the way, like I don't talk about Hallmark movies in a negative way as a whole. I just mean that Hallmark movies very often are lower budget and then therefore have a compressed schedule. And so you don't have the time sometimes to do things
mm,
multiple times or to work things out. And so what you get if it's good enough is good enough. You're not going to keep, you're not going to do the Fincher or Kubrick's 20 something takes of something to get it right. You just literally don't have the time. So for me, I don't know what the budget is on this movie. It's Netflix. I assume it was pretty big, but it felt like there were some scenes to me that felt like either the first draft writing wise or like the first or second take shot wise. And they're just kind of like, yeah, this is it. We're moving on. And instead of like digging and trying to find
mm,
like what is the truth behind what these people are saying, it's more like
yeah.
driving the plot forward. Like, why did that coach really care that that kid plays on his team, or was he there because the plot said that the coach has to come with his hat in his hand, trying to get uh, this kid to actually play on his like it just felt very like plotty to me.
Mm, just maybe overly predictable too. Um,
Yeah, but again, like if it's you can get away with that in a sports movie, right? Like you know, I would say that there are some exceptions, right? Rocky, the original Rocky, he doesn't win at the end. I think
mm.
that's not predictable. I think, when you start watching that movie for the first time, you think he's going to win. Um, and I
He
think that's
does
a great
win. He
ending.
does. He wins the love of
He
Adrian.
wins Adrian, right? But he doesn't win the boxing match. And like, but most of the sports movies that we're going to talk about, like they win at the end. And that's kind of predictable, but you're okay with it.
Mm.
Um, if anything, this he wins at the end of this, but it's such a like his win is that he gets to play for the Expos for a few years and never really gets to make it before getting
Yeah.
injured.
I guess what I mean by predictability is even with the dialogue, like, it's just very, even with the very first conversation with the young girl, who, wants to be Ricky's girlfriend. It
Mhm.
just feels very on the nose. Oh, you can't do it. Like, you're never gonna, you know.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it is very on the nose. And then again, that does become a motif of like, I'm still your girlfriend. But I do agree with you. Like maybe the first time it could have just been like, we get the sense that they're sweet on each other, and
Mm,
then there's a progression. Whereas instead of like an arc and a progression, we just hear literally like, you're still my boyfriend over and over and over again.
yeah. Just again, the subtext is missing there. It's just the dialogue is too. It just felt too straightforward. Which make the characters less interesting. I mean, I know they're kids, and you know what? I mean, I guess a positive aspect of those opening scenes is I did kind of have this, gave off this image of childlike, this innocence, this sort of
Mhm.
purity, and I thought that was quite nice. What
Yeah,
about,
I didn't think the acting was that bad.
yeah, I thought the kids were fine. It's just, again, I think just the dialogue and the direction. Yeah,
That
just,
does remind me of one other moment though, where when they're kicked out of the town,
oh
and
yeah.
they're driving, they got everything strapped to their car, and they're driving, and it breaks down, and
Hmm.
they're flipping out. Like he starts flipping out. Like the first time we see Randy Quaid like lose control, and then they all kind of wake up because he kicks the car and it starts pouring. I think it's very like it's almost like a trailer moment where like the kid's like, "Oh, I guess it can't get any worse," and then the rain starts pouring down, and then that ends in like them all laughing hysterically. And to me, that felt like this is the type of story that we all tell around the table in our own family internally because it's
Mm,
hilarious to us and and this happened, but like from a like direction standpoint, it didn't feel earned to me. Like for him to go from that enraged and he's literally at his lowest point and he doesn't know how he's going to support his family to like laughing because little Ricky made a joke. I
mm,
think it's like he says like we're the most unlucky people in Texas or something like that, and Ricky says like Oklahoma too or something like that, and then they all just laugh hysterically like it's the end of like a Peppa Pig episode. Like
mm,
everyone starts rolling on the ground, and it's like I get it. It's a funny he's making light in a terrible situation, and it is funny, but like it felt to me more like again like this is something. I get the idea of this. I'm not like along with the joke and laughing as hysterically with them and feeling it. And so for him to go for the father to go from that point to just with that one little quip being like laughing hysterically, he still doesn't know. Like he's still trapped in the middle of nowhere with no gas, no tire, everything that he owns strapped to a car, and he's got to feed his kids and family, and wife and mother-in-law. And then like again, this has to be based in reality because like the Deus ex machina of all of like this rich woman driving by who has a job for him eventually, like that's something that I don't think a writer would ever make up. I think that's like really how something like that happened.
mm,
And so they went with it and they put it in there, but it was like so convenient that I was kind of like, they're like, all right, we're going to hang a lantern on this. And it's going to be, instead of it being convenient, we're going to call it a miracle. And like God wanted this to happen. So that kind of, I guess, is like, if it really did happen, the best way to do it.
mm,
But that scene just remind it didn't it just reminded me of like as I was watching this film, I was kind of like I kind of know how I'm supposed to feel here, but I'm just like I'm watching it from out here for some reason, and I don't know why.
mm,
And that's why it's so hard to direct, right? Because like you have to know while you're telling the story, while you're shooting it, what you need to have in order to make people feel it.
mm. What did you think about, Dennis Quaid and his character and his performance? Did you connect with any of it?
I mean, I don't think it was poorly done. Um, um, I don't know. Again, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of scenes in there where he pulls back because if he did what you imagine him to do, he would be unfree. Like, instead of beating the kid, he just tells him
Right.
to go inside, right? There's a lot of
Mm,
movies where it's kind of like, I don't know how I feel about that, right? Because it's like I'm glad that he didn't do it, obviously, because I don't want him to see him beat his kid, and I like him more because he didn't do it. But also, then it's like, is that consistent with his character for like the rest of what we've seen?
mm.
Um, I don't know. What did you think?
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with his performance, but yeah, um, again, just predictable, nothing surprising about him and his character. At one point, I did think that he was going to go down. Yeah, that a more sort of abusive, like a more, I don't know. I thought his character would be more complex than it was, but it didn't. It kind of didn't turn out to be that way. I felt like his beats were pretty repetitive as well. Like the
Yeah, yeah. But I feel like
his
that
thing.
is a
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, it's kind of a repeating thing where oh, you can't play baseball, and then his wife will get involved, or the mother will get involved, and it happens like 3 or 4 times in the film, and it's just like, oh, okay, I kind of get. There's no real like, I don't know, there's no real development I felt in his character.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I think I was gonna say like I think this might be where it's constrained in a bad way by reality, right? Because it seemed
Mm,
to me more like his characters seemed like people change, but they don't change that much in real life.
mm,
So it seemed to me like I would totally buy that this minister would go his entire life not ever going to see his kid in a baseball game. And the person who does that like doesn't easily change anything else. To the point where like an obvious example, they get kicked out of their first church because he takes a stand and he's like, you can't spit tobacco and smoke in this church. And then they go out of their way to show multiple times later, like his congregation is doing that and he doesn't say anything about it. But it kind of reads as just like more like he's afraid to lose another job than he's like changed or has become easier in a way. And it's like in the straight movie version of this that is not held back by reality. There's that moment where he goes full circle on, or not full circle, but arcs around where he tells somebody like, "Hey, you can't spit tobacco in this church. Like, we're going to clean up this church." And I get though, like the reality is, if you're a real person, you probably wouldn't do that, honestly, right? Because are you really going to risk this job that has come down from God that you're lucky to have, by making the same mistake again and telling your congregation that they can't do this in church? Like you're
mm.
probably not going to do it. You're probably just going to deal with it and clean up tobacco off the floor if you have to. So I think that's like, I think that's more like it's constrained by who that guy probably really was. Um, but again, that might sometimes that truth, like the reality truth, can hurt the quote unquote truth of the movie.
Mm.
Um, because he kind of gets an arc. He shows up after doing his sermon. He shows up at the tail end of the baseball game. But like, what did you feel like amazed in that moment? Like,
Uh, it's just, I don't know. It just felt a little flat to me. I suppose. Um, there wasn't really a moment in the movie where I felt like, oh, this is, that again, that lump that you get in your throat, or you feel choked up, or I never really felt that way in this film. Which is
that's yeah.
unfortunate because again, I felt like that's what these films are supposed. I felt like I should have hot tears running down my running down my face by the end of the film, right?
That's
Yeah, that's kind
exactly
of,
my point. You should, right? Like
yeah.
let's just count off the moments where you should have felt that, right?
Mm,
A boy who's been in braces his entire life is magically walking without the need for braces.
mm,
That's a lump in your should be a lump in your throat moment, right? Or could has the potential to be a lump in your throat moment. The
mm,
hitting the 19 home runs in a row after you've told the guy like, oh, that's a lump in your throat moment.
mm,
The dad showing up when he's never been to a baseball game in your life Instead, like I was almost worried, like, is this going to go super cheesy? And instead of running home from third, is he going to run to his dad? Like, I was actually worried about that in the moment. Like, and I was like, oh gosh,
I almost
like,
feel like I wanted him to do that just to give me like
well,
some sort of like, you know what I mean? Like
well,
yeah,
because you were waiting for something, right? You were
yeah,
waiting for a crescendo that never really comes. And then like the guy, the being the designated hitter for both teams and what he
mm,
did, 11, what is it, 11 hit for
10 for
11, like
10. Yeah,
all of
11 for
those,
11,
like
right?
when you're telling that story, those are moments where you get chills, right? You're like, holy shit, like someone's got to make this a movie, right? Like, and they did, and it just feels like somewhere in the process they forgot, like maybe they got so familiar with the material they forgot to sell those big moments, or
Mm,
maybe those moments are so big in fact that they were kind of like, well, we're just going to tell people this fact happened and that's going to be enough. But it's like that's not how filmmaking works. It's not reading a list of, it's not a PowerPoint list of facts. It's okay, this is an emotional moment that we're going to shoot as an emotional scene that you're going to receive with emotion. And it's almost like it feels like they're afraid of being like melodramatic or pushing it too much. I don't know. Obviously,
mm,
I'm not in their head. I don't know why. And again, the movie's doing well, so maybe I'm wrong. I just all I can say is the way I would have wanted it to be, and that's why every director is different. But it's like I would have wanted to push those moments with music swells, with close-ups, with reaction shots, with crowd scenes, like extra moments in there to expand the time, expand the moment,
mm,
to give the audience a chance to like feel what's the weight of what's happening and like the enormity of what's happening. And instead, a lot of this feels more like, um, okay, we're just gonna put a camera here and let this unfold, and we're not gonna go to a close up. Like, um, we're not gonna, do like all of the normal filmmaking tools that maybe they're just like this has been done a million times, or we're not going to use those. Like maybe they figured they were formal crutches. Who knows? Like maybe they really did think
mm,
about these things. They purposely tried to stay away from them because they thought they were cheesy. That's possible too. But
mm.
for me, it just felt like you've got these moments. Like if you read the outline of what happens to this person, it's an amazing story. And like I didn't feel amazed.
Mm. Yeah, at some points I felt like I'd rather be watching like a documentary of this person or something. I just rather, I don't know. It just, yeah, it felt yeah, there was a disconnect there. Yeah, how unfortunate. I mean, because it's surprising too, just because after I watched the film, finding out that, the writers, right, are the same people that wrote, I mean, the other person, the other writer wrote Men of Honor, Scott,
Mm,
I'm sorry, Scott Marshall Smith, who's a NYU grad, who's a fellow Tisch alumni,
mm.
wrote Men of Honor, which was, have you seen that film, Tom?
I don't think
Cuba
so.
Gooding Jr. and Robert De Niro,
Yeah,
yeah,
I know what it is. I don't think I ever saw it
yeah, I
though.
mean, just I thought that film was interesting. Like I thought the characters were complex. Um, yeah, it's just an interesting, complex relationship between the Cuba Gooding Jr., the naval officer, and his commander, and Robert De Niro. Yeah, a really interesting relationship. So I was surprised that the same guys who wrote Hoosiers and Rudy and they seem to have so much experience in telling these like really epic sort of inspiring stories. Like you said, I don't know what happened with the filmmaking part of it, with the script, and I'm not sure exactly what happened, but these people who are kind of the premier um, writers for this kind of material, and then just not having a film completely land. I don't
I mean,
know.
it's also like a more difficult task because it's a biopic, right? And so like the ground that they cover is from when this kid is real young
Mm,
to like late high school age, whereas Rudy Hoosiers, those are all, you know, they're sports seasons, right? They're what, high school and college, or is
mm,
Hoosier, no, college and college, right? Um, but it's older people for the entire time, and it's characters that are moving through like a specific story. It's different than like the ground that you have to cover
mm.
of like multiple people growing up over a long period of time.
You're right.
Um,
Yeah, it is different. Um,
yeah, I mean there are kids baseball movies even, right? Like remember Rookie of the Year and
mm,
Little Big League and
mm,
even like Angels in the Outfield. Like these are movies like The Sandlot. Again, these are like 90s kids baseball movies that are
mm,
all superior in my opinion to this one.
mm,
But again, those are also like more lighthearted and more based on the baseball and some like crazy premise. This
mm,
is the opposite. This is a drama biopic that involves baseball. Um, although I don't know, like A League of Their Own is based on a true story, and
mm,
like uh, I felt much more connection with the women in the 40s in A League of Their Own than I did with, you know, this guy from Texas who in the 70s or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
mm,
um, we don't know that much about him either, is the thing. Like, for to watch a movie about Ricky Hill for 2 hours, all we know is that he was born, with health issues and that he can swing like nobody's ever seen. That's it, right? Do
mm,
we know anything else other than he's like smart, religious, and loves baseball?
mm. Yeah.
And like, is that enough to know about a character after 2 hours?
Mm. Yeah, that would have been an interesting approach to delve more into who he is. You know, even that first skip into like when he becomes an adult was interesting to me. Like I just felt I maybe wanted to know more about Ricky. It just went by so quickly, and yeah, it just felt a bit jarring to me. I don't really know why. And then even seeing that his former, his childhood friend, the girl, it just didn't quite land for some reason.
Well, yeah,
Maybe
because they
it,
reference her coming back, but we didn't know she was away, right?
right.
Like,
Um,
so that doesn't really have the same weight to it.
mm, I
If
mean,
she's
they
been
were writing
away
each
and
other
she came
letters and
back.
stuff, right?
Well,
Um,
yeah, when they're younger, we know that they're
yeah,
writing letters because he
but
has to leave the town. But it seems more like she went away from her town and
mm,
then came back, like when she's older. Um, and I also wonder about all that too, because it seems like the character of the girlfriend and then wife is not the actual. Like there's that weird. I only looked this up because at the end there's like a title card, like there is at the end of every biopic of like what happened.
mm,
And there's like, oh, Ricky got married at home plate and his father officiated it, but it doesn't list the girl's name. And I was like, wait, why wouldn't you say like Ricky and this other character who's also in the movie got married at home plate?
mm,
And then I looked it up and it's like because he's divorced and for what we know how these things are like so it's based on a real the person that was his girlfriend and they got married but that's not her name, so like because it's a biopic you can't say like Ricky and so got married because then like he didn't marry someone named that. um and so like I don't really remember what I was saying, but it's just like I don't know. There's like again, like, that makes me feel it's a little emblematic of like the distance that I feel from all of this.
mm.
It's like if everyone was in on it and telling the same story and everything was like I don't know. I guess people get divorced and then you wouldn't necessarily want to be part of that. Yeah, but like
Yeah.
it also it's just a little bit of a downer, right? In terms of like a sports movie, like yes, they fall in love. He falls in love with his childhood sweetheart, but then they get divorced. And that's not in the movie, but it's the truth. And
Mm,
then yes, his dream is to get to the major leagues and he does, but he kind of like is sort of on the Expos for a few. He never like yeah, he makes it, but more than most people will ever make it. But he doesn't
mm,
get to be like a named successful Major League Baseball player.
mm,
I don't know. It's a difficult ending.
mm.
Like I think they did choose the best possible ending point, right?
Yeah.
We get to see his father come around. We get to see this amazing, never done again, double, designated hitter for both teams, 11 for 11, takes a another hit even when he could have taken his base. Like all that is like amazing
Yeah, it is.
Hollywood
Yeah.
stuff. Um, and so I think all that happening works and is should be there. I just think there's something about the execution, and maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe this is the 2020s version of sports films, and this
Mm,
is exactly the execution that you should do. And I'm pining for the 90s, 80s, 70s versions of sports films, and I'm wrong. It's totally possible. It's just that maybe because I had that expectation going in, it's like listening to a piece of music where you're waiting for the crescendo and you're waiting
mhm,
for the emotional swell, and then it just never comes. But maybe that's because this artist has decided that, a bridge needs to go here instead of a crescendo, and like this is the way I'm going to write music, and maybe this is the way
mm,
it'll be done moving forward. I don't know. But if the point of a sports film or this any film or this sport like is to make you get wrapped up in the emotion of what's happening, I didn't feel it for this.
mm. Yeah. Um, yeah, unfortunate. I don't know. Like you said in the beginning, just I felt like just all the elements were there. It's just yeah, and it's just in the execution, I think. Um,
Yeah, I wish we had somebody on here who loved the film, because I almost feel like I want somebody to tell me like, oh, this is why this was done this way, and like this is
mm,
amazing, and how did you not feel this way? Because I never want a film to be it. I get very little out of talking negatively about a film,
yeah, me too. I don't like, necessarily
so like
talking
I don't
negative
want
about
to
it.
bash it, and I'm struggling with it more because like it anyway, if there were any mistakes made in this film, it's 100% mistakes that I feel like I could make,
Mm,
because again, like I think they did things right. I think they identified here are the things that need to be told in the story. Here's the. I think it's not structured particularly poor. Like there's nothing obvious that you could throw out there that'd be like, oh yeah, this was terrible, and so therefore it fell flat. It's more just like the magic of making a film and directing a film
mm,
and editing a film is such an art that like it's hard to know what you should do differently. All you can say
mm,
is like how you felt when you were watching it. And again, we all know that can change based on your mood and where you are even when you're watching it.
mm,
So I would like to like get somebody who has a more positive opinion of this or who did feel a lot from it. And then maybe sometimes them like imparting that can make me have a more positive view on it too. Um, but I just am not the right person to do that because I just didn't. I watched it, I don't know, 3, 4 days ago, and I feel like I've largely forgotten most of it already.
mm. How did you feel about the that rivalry between the kid that calls him Robot Boy, and did you feel like that was like a sort of a, one of those classic moments, or did that also feel a bit was something a bit lacking there for you?
But for me, it felt like there was something lacking there, right? It felt like
Mm,
a trope. It felt like we get the kid when they're very, very young, and then we get him come back at the high school
right.
thing,
Hmm.
and he's like talking to himself, and he's like, "This ends now," like very. And then we just hear about him again when his other young friend, the guy who catches for him, says like, "Ah,
Mm,
yeah, after that day." To me, that again, that felt like the Ricky Hill in a bar telling the story and being like, "Yeah, man, this kid, like, he was such an asshole to me, this bully. Man, I hit a homer off him. He never played baseball again." That's the POV, and that's the reason that's in there. It's not about like that kid's story at all.
mm,
It's about like I want to tell everyone that I'm so good that I had this rivalry with this dude and I won, and he hung up his glove and he never pitched a game again because I schooled him so much. Like it was like a little bit like blowhardy to me,
mm,
like to put that even in there, because it's just like this is just another kid who's like just like you trying to make it to the majors, and it's just like, do you want to take pride in the reason that you're the reason he gave up?
mm.
Like, yeah, like what's the end of that story? Yeah, like, yeah, that dude went home and killed himself. Like, you still happy about it? Like, like at some point it's still negative, and it's like,
I kind of wanted them to
uh,
be friends.
well, I
I mean,
mean,
even like
again,
just it's just I just wanted, to feel like something there. It just felt I don't know, it just felt a little, again,
But I
just
see,
a
I think
bit empty.
in real life they would never be friends. And so again, like this is to a certain extent constrained by reality.
Yeah.
And like, so far you seem like you want like the super Disney version of
I
this, right? Like you
do.
want him
I
to
mean,
run to
because
his
if you're,
dad.
dude, if you're gonna go for it, just go. Like, just do it. Like, come on. Like, I know it's a
Again,
biopic, but it's
that's
like, but if you can work some things in there. It doesn't have to be like exactly, like, it should story, and it
well,
should. If you're going for
yeah, it's
that
adaptation.
inspiring, right? If you're going for that tone, that vibe, just go for it. You know what I mean?
But
Because everyone's waiting for it. Yeah.
this is why these conversations are good, right? Because like I would have hated it if he ran to his dad at third base. I would have
Mm,
hated it if those two were friends at the end. But you would have loved it. And so it's like everyone makes their own movie.
sure.
And I did feel like I get what you're saying about wanting those because at least you would have felt something, or at least they would have tried to make you feel something. I wouldn't have wanted those two specific things, and it's hard to know what would have worked. But I think we're both having that reaction of like um just not feeling as much. I don't know, especially like being a middle-aged man, there are certain things in our society, and I'm much less so than most people, but like there are certain things that we're quote unquote allowed to get emotional about,
Mm,
and sports is one of them. And so I always see, especially in film, like sports is an avenue where you can make a drama
mm,
and have grown men cry and not like I cry all the time and have no issue with it. But there are plenty of people who like still are of that like men don't cry, but they'll cry at a sports game or they'll cry at a sports movie, and there's nothing holding them back from feeling that.
mm,
And to me, this felt more like the makers of the film were the type of people that were like, well, I'm not going to cry. You know what
mm.
I mean? Like it
Sort of,
felt like
yeah, maybe.
sort of cold or like hard-edged sports instead of like emotional sports storytelling.
Mm,
Like it felt like you should care about the facts that I went for 11 for 11 and those are my stats and I made the majors. And because those are facts and are true, that's why you need to know my story and that's why you should care about it. And I get that, but in most films, at least most successful films, they say, "Hey, I'm going to show you why you should care about this. I'm going to
mm.
make you feel something."
That makes
And this
sense.
almost like takes for granted that you're going to care about it.
Yeah. I feel like maybe I don't know, and I don't want to make any assumptions. And I don't know the true, the Ricky Hill story. I just didn't have time to do the research on it. But I almost feel like maybe I wanted to see some more of his actual struggle, because that's that like the leg brace thing, and that must have been he must have been hard to deal with. I am again, it's just
Mhm.
an assumption, but like that stuff is not easy to deal with,
Mhm.
that amount of just pain and just his the level of like excellence that he must have had in his mind, like to achieve those goals must have been like torturous to go through. And like I don't think like a 2-minute montage of like, them running around and having fun. I just don't think that was,
No, I
I
think
don't
you're
know.
absolutely
Yeah,
right.
it
I
just
think you're, and
more
it's
intensity
almost,
there, right? Like it's just like,
but well, it's almost like again the distance and the coldness. It's almost like Ricky Hill, the man, would have to have had so much pride and tenacity, and also have never thought of himself as a victim, right? I don't think this character ever thought of himself as a victim because I think he could have never accomplished everything that he did. But it's almost like if you're telling yourself this, you're telling the story, and you were never able to think of yourself as the victim of your circumstances. That does rob the audience a little bit of what you know, right? Because he was there and he does know of the struggles and he does know of those moments that must have been so difficult. And I feel like he takes that for granted because he was there. But like for us, unfortunately, you have to show the audience a little bit of that because really it's just this mental checkbox of like, okay, kid in leg braces, that sucks. And we know that. But we don't actually get them like the moments of him being a victim of that. before we start getting the moments of him breaking out of the braces and like overcoming it. So I think that's a really good point of like, and that's I think why I reacted so much to the mother scene, because the mother scene is the only scene
Mm,
where she starts to touch on that about like the fear a parent has when their kid is born and they tell them they're never going to walk, like the emotion of that. And even with Dennis Quaid's character, like you get the sense when he turns over the journal and he's looking up like the
mm,
medical journal of like ankles, you get the sense that he really cares about this kid, and the real reason he's not doing it is because he's afraid that this kid's going to do something to himself that's going to permanently injure himself. But you don't feel it, it's almost like tangential. I don't know. I think what you hit on there, that was a really good point. Is like we almost like when we talked about The Color Purple, we talked about like going through the hell of seeing what that main character is going through and how like potentially hard that is for an audience. And this goes like totally the other way. And I don't want this to be The Color Purple, but maybe even one scene of like the kid alone where we're allowed to see him vulnerable because maybe no one else is watching him, but like something that really makes us feel, damn, this sucks for this kid. Everything is harder. But we don't get that.
yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
yeah,
I think you're right.
the more you learn about the character and the more you kind of understand his struggle, then the more you connect with him, right? And the more those scenes really land. The 19 homers, like, oh, how, that part of it is inspiring, or it could be if there was more of a, yeah, there's more of
Well,
a
there's that
connection
there's
there.
that scene on like on the covered bridge where like his back is hurting when they're older and he's talking to his
Mm,
girlfriend and he's just like, I'm always in pain. Like the doctor's just gonna tell me to stop. But it's like we didn't really know that. Like we've
mm,
never seen and experienced him being in real pain throughout it. So I think you kind of hit on a really good thing that could have added to like our empathy for the character, I think.
yeah. So yeah, we're kind of winding down here. So, any final thoughts, Tom? So, would you ultimately, I guess the important question is, would you recommend this film for other people to watch? I mean, it was number one on Netflix. It's number two now, but it's interesting to me
Honestly,
that it's so that I think you're right, like that algorithm, right? Of like, and like honestly, like, do people connect with films like this? Like, even if it's not quite there,
some
because
people do for sure.
yeah, because you get the gist of it, right? I mean, everything is there, and you get the idea. I mean,
And I
so
don't think it's a terrible film. It's not a bad film. I just think if somebody asked me, should I watch this? I would take 30 seconds and I would say, no,
mm,
here are the 10 baseball movies you should watch. Do you know what I mean? Like it would literally take me under a minute to write down
mm.
10 baseball movies that I think are vastly superior to this one.
In terms of like obviously the filmmaking part of it and the technical aspects, but what about Ricky Hill's story? Like, is his would you
I would
watch it to
say,
learn more about his story?
I would say, read a book about it. There's probably a book about it. Watch a documentary. I would say if you want to get what you get out of watching this movie, I'll tell you the beats of what happens to this guy in 5 minutes. Um, you're not going to get more emotionally fulfilling by spending over 2 hours watching his story than you are. You're really what you get is the facts of the story, which are amazing and are a great story that deserves to be told. Um, or honestly, I would say, hey, you know what? Yeah, watch it because if you love it, I really want to have a conversation with you about why you love it.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that discussion. If you found it interesting, informative, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing. It'll really help us out. We have some really cool discussions lined up for you, so I hope you're looking forward to them, and I'll see you next time.